Hey, it's me, James, and I'd like to welcome you to the latest installment of my Kipper Cards by Category series. If this is your first time here, I'd like to say welcome, and if you're a returning viewer and subscriber, I'd like to say welcome back and thank you for continuing to support the work that goes into this channel. So if this is your first time here, let me get a little bit of setup or background as to how this series has gone forward up to this point in time. So this series actually started with a request from a viewer who asked me if I would highlight the different categories in the Kipper card deck system. And it just so happened at the time that I got the request that I was working on my own personal Kipper deck with that very idea in mind. And so in prior episodes I used one video per category, and then once I thought that that series was wrapped up, viewers came back and asked me if I would do sample readings showing how those different categories within the Kipper card deck system interplayed with one another. So it has now become an ongoing series. I recently got a request from a viewer who asked me if I would be willing to make a video highlighting how Kipper and Lenormand, two different deck systems, could be read together. So that's what we're going to do in this video. So on the left is my Kipper card deck, which has been the star of this video series, and it is the Kipper of Himm. I made this deck for myself in 2023, and I wanted it to help me remember the different types of cards within the Kipper card deck system. So every card has a colored border, and it's based on its category. So you'll see that as we begin the reading process for this video. So again, my Kipper card deck is on the left. On the right is a very recent creation. I'm very excited about it. So I made this Lenormand deck. So the Lenormand deck we're going to be working with here is the Mitchell Lenormand Oracle. It is by yours truly, and I made it just this year. So it's a very recent addition to my now growing personal deck collection. And so if you are familiar with Lenormand, then you will know it's a 36 card deck system. Actually, both of these are 36 card deck systems, so they are similar in terms of deck count, in terms of the cards within the system, in terms of the count, but they read very differently. So this is going to be a very interesting experiment. So I was thinking, prior to coming on, about a scenario that I wanted to use for an example reading. So I'm filming this video on Sunday, June the 15th, 2025, which is Father's Day here in the United States. And I was at one of my two jobs earlier today, and I was talking to a woman about our relationships with our fathers. It turned out that we both have had absentee fathers growing up. So my father was not really a present or active part of my life growing up. And she actually said she had a similar experience. And so I wanted to kind of come up with an example based on Father's Day. So here's what I came up with. And I was using my own personal experience of having an absentee father as part of the situation or scenario. So here's the scenario I came up with. So let's say we have a young man, and we'll call him Brian. And he is about to embark on going off to college. So he's graduated high school. He's now about to embark on college. And so little plot twist in this story is that he grew up without his father present. And now that he's about to embark on leaving home, going off to school, his father has shown up in his life, wanting to have a relationship with him. And so Brian wants to ask the cards, what does he need to know about starting a relationship with his father at this point in his life? What does he need to know about that? Okay? So we're going to go ahead with that question in mind, and we will start the shuffling process. So I'm going to move my Lenormand deck to the side, and we're going to start with the Kipper deck, because the Kipper deck is the star of this video series. So we're going to go ahead and shuffle the question into the cards. I usually shuffle my decks for about 5 times, and that's usually 1 shuffle per element. I'm an element person, so that would be earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. Now I'm going to go ahead, if you're no stranger to these videos, I like to cut my cards. And I've decided that I'm going to do a line of 5 using each deck. So we're going to have 2 different lines here. So I'm getting ready to fan the cards so I can pull the cards for the Kipper deck for the first line. So I'm just looking for 5 cards in the fan that are getting my attention. Okay, so at the bottom of your screen you should see the 5 cards. I'm going to take the remainder of the Kipper card deck up, and we'll move that to one side. So I'm going to count back. 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to now put them in a pile and move them to one side because now I need the table space to shuffle the Lenormand deck in a similar manner. Again, focusing on the question. Okay, same thing now. We're going to go ahead and cut the cards. Again, looking at the line, or the fan for my 5 card line. These are the Lenormand cards. I'm going to pick the rest up. So now I'm going to spread these cards out in the order that they were selected. Okay. Now we're going to take the Kipper cards in the order that they were selected and put them on top. Okay, so now we have all the cards laid out. So I'm going to start with the Kipper card. The way I'm planning on doing this, now you could do this in a number of ways. There's no hard and fast rule when you're working with combination decks. You get to decide. So I'm thinking that I'm going to allow the top line, the Kipper line, to be opening things up. We'll look at that line first, and then we'll use the Lenormand line to kind of offer maybe a different perspective depending on the cards, or maybe clarifying the top Kipper cards depending on what they are and how they blend together, if that's possible. Okay, so again, I'm going to read the cards left to right now. The interesting thing about Kipper, remember, is that based on the card or the type of card, it could change the direction of the line. So starting with the card on the left, we have Great Fortune. Okay, so now this would be what we call the opening card or the trigger card. So now this would be a card that would kind of give us some idea as to why Brian is asking the question that he's asking. So now remember, we have to always remember the context in the question. So Brian is asking, what does he need to know about starting a relationship with his father at this point in his life? Now remember the situation too. He's about to head off to college, right? So he's about to possibly leave the state to attend school. So, and then his father has shown up. So now, Great Fortune is an interesting card because it is the best card in the Kipper deck system. So it usually represents abundance, blessing, good fortune, things like that. So this could be a great starting point for Brian in terms of the situation and the question, right? Again, this is about blessings, abundance, and great fortune. So now, for those of you who are new, I didn't even introduce this aspect of it. If you notice that this card has a red border, it is because it is a stop card. All the stop cards in my deck have a red colored border, right? So now moving on to the next card, we have another stop card. And we have, again, a card that suggests a windfall. So this is Win Lots. So Win Lots is a card that can suggest a financial windfall. It's about abundance, much like Great Fortune in that regard. However, if you look at the image, this card has a slot machine on it. So it would say to me, for Brian, that even though things might start off well with Great Fortune, right? This is probably a big deal for him to have his father, suddenly wanting to be a part of his life, right? This card implies gambling, right? Because of the slot machine. So it's about, being aware that there may be a gamble, a risk involved, that kind of thing. So it's about, he's taking a chance, right? So it would be almost like maybe his father is asking him to take a chance on him, right? That kind of thing. So, but this card for me can be a little bit cautionary against Great Fortune. Out of the two, I think Great Fortune is better in this regard because this, again, can represent like gambling, taking chances, taking risks, things like that. So that's what I would say about the two cards, but they're both stop cards, right? So now sometimes Win Lots can represent a lot of something. So, but just the two cards in of themselves implies the potentiality for something good to happen here in this situation. Okay, middle card. So I usually look at the middle card as the heart of the matter. And so here we have young gentleman. So now, even though Brian is a younger person, because he's asking for the reading, I would look at main person 1 to be his card, right? So young gentleman would, as a person card, because the color of the border is purple and those are the people cards in my deck, is that this could imply somebody who's a young person, a young male in particular, right? So for me, we could go with that as a possibility. Again, most people might think, well, this would be Brian's card, but Brian in the story of Kipper would always be main person 1 when he is asking the question, right? Because the main person 1 and main person 2 cards are always representatives of the people who are asking the question, right? The people that we are reading for, right? So if that's the case, then what could this card possibly mean? Then this card could be its secondary theme or meanings. And for me, this is a card that can talk about business or finance, right? So it's very interesting. If I go with that as a possibility here, then there are 3 cards on the table that each can imply something having to do with money, right? Great Fortune, Win Lots, and now Young Gentleman, right? If we go with this as a possible money and finance issue, right? So, but if we go with this as the heart of the matter, I always look to the fact that the young gentleman is wearing a suit in this card. So it could be that at the heart of the matter or the issue is that Brian is concerned about how well suited is his father in terms of having a relationship with him. It could also be too, like maybe feeling like the idea of, keeping things formal, because he's, again, wearing a suit, that's formal attire. Right, but I'm looking at this as the possibility about how well suited are they in terms of people. Now, remember, Brian has grown up without this man in his life. So, how well suited are they going to be coming together in terms of a relationship, right? And so now with this card, there's a directional cue. So now the young gentleman is facing this way, making it a line of sight reading. And then, so these cards would be the positive aspects that he could be facing. And then these cards behind him could be either something having to do with the past or a challenge, because this would be considered inauspicious placement. All right. Now, if we go with the idea by category, here we have 2 stop cards. Even though they're great stop cards in a majority would suggest on some level things not progressing quickly, not a whole lot of movement, right? So that could just be here, Brian wanting to play it safe, right? Again, with this idea about taking chances, play it safe, right? Maybe not opening himself up too much for the risk of, potentially being disappointed, hurt, what have you. But so this could be, moving things slowly. Again, even though those are good cards. Okay, so now let's look at the card behind Young Gentleman. And here we have another stop card, right? And so this is letter. Letter is the communication card in the Kipper deck system, and it represents all forms of communication, right? So it could suggest, too, that Brian is concerned about how well suited they are in terms of relationship, but how are they going to communicate, right? Now, this could also imply, now remember back to the context of the scenario, Brian is about to be going away to college, right? So it could be a matter of the way they're going to keep in touch, maybe through distance forms of communication like email or text message or phone calls. Maybe very little up close and personal type contact or situations, right? Not seeing each other in person, but maybe spending a whole lot of time communicating, but, through those means, right? So that's what I would say about letter. And then the last card, another stop card. So just the fact that Young Gentleman is surrounded by stop cards, again, shows that there's probably not going to be a whole lot of progress in this relationship just because of Brian going off to school, right? And possibly again, maybe Brian wanting to kind of play it safe, from a place of caution, right? And then here we have yet another money card. So here we have unexpected money, right? So now this could be about money changing hands. But for me, with the word unexpected at the end could suggest that there's a surprise that is going to be down the line for Brian. Because this card can represent surprises. It can also represent improvement. So it could just be a matter of, even though it may look like for Brian that he's hit the jackpot or hit the lottery in terms of his father showing up, he may feel like he wants to play it safe because he's not sure about how well suited they are, and that's a nice word or a nice way of saying compatible or how they're going to get along, that kind of thing. And based on communication, so the communication, the letter card is probably the most significant card here, because maybe based on communication going forward, then that will give Brian an idea about the state of the relationship. He may be surprised at the level of communication and feeling like he wants to move forward because he may sense like that relationship is going to be improving. As I'm looking at the image, I'm getting the sense with unexpected money that Brian may have to kind of think about what value could having his father in his life at this point in time give him. What value could that relationship add to his life in terms of making him richer, right? How is he going to enrich his life is what's coming to me in the moment, right? So that's how I would read the top line here. Okay, so now that is how Kipper is looking at the situation, or how I'm translating the Kipper cards, which is probably a more accurate way to say that. So now we have the Lenormand cards. And so now let's see what the Lenormand has to say in regard to this. So first card. Here we have birds. Okay, so birds in the Lenormand deck system is all about communication. And if you notice that there are two birds on the card. So the birds card is verbal communication. So that goes in alignment with what I was talking about, phone calls, right? This is either speaking together in person or speaking on the phone, but it's verbal communication, whereas the letter card is highlighting all forms of communication, right? So now if I read this separately from the Kipper line, then the birds card turning up could be Brian is asking the question. Remember, the first card for me is the trigger, like why is the person asking the question? So this card can be about a couple of things. First, it can be about speculation. So Brian is speculating as to whether or not he wants to communicate with his father at this point, right? Because this card can be about speculation and also communication, like I said previously. And the other thing could be from an emotional standpoint, the Birds card can be about being nervous. This card is about nervousness. It's about anxiety. And it could also be that Brian is wondering whether or not his father is going to actually remain in the picture, or is he going to fly off, right? Because he's already had a history of not being present. So the birds can represent somebody who's flighty, you know, that kind of thing. So it may be questioning that aspect of the situation, right? So he's speculating on how well will they communicate, or speculating on the idea of like if his father's going to be flighty and take off, right? So that's what I would say with birds. Next card. Here we have bear. So now bear, it can represent power, control, strength, being strong. It could also represent somebody who's in a position of authority. So this could be, you know, Brian necessarily having to be strong, or they're going to have a conversation, and Brian is going to maybe stand in his own personal power in those conversations with his dad. But there could also be a discussion about resources, and that would bring us back to the idea of the money aspect, because bear can be a money card. So again, remember, we have great fortune, win lots, and unexpected money. So is there going to be a discussion about resources, a discussion about money? It could be, you know, if Brian's dad was an absentee dad, you know, like the idea of support. Was he there financially supporting Brian, or was that not even a thing? So there may be a discussion or a conversation around that, right? And remember, now young gentleman is also a money card, right? So that's how I would look at bear. Again, bear is about strength, power, control, force. Now, as I said, the word force, it could be like, is someone going to be in the scene to force Brian to have a conversation with his father, right? Here, it looks like, you know, Brian might be open to it, but with the Lenormand cards, that might not be the case, and somebody may have to step in and say, you know, trying to kind of force the issue. And it could be force the issue one way or another. Now, it could be forcing the issue in terms of having Brian talk to his father, communicate to his father, or maybe force the issue about not having communication with his father, right? Now, bear is said to be like mama bear, so this could be Brian's mother, you know, maybe showing up in the mix here with this card. So that's what I would say about bear. Bear, again, is about power, control, authority figures, resources, and the possibility of somebody who's overbearing. So this could be conversation, communication with somebody who's overbearing. Like, I'm thinking like maybe his father could come on really strong and it's kind of like a turnoff. Okay. Let's look at the middle card, Heart of the Line here. And here we have Fish, another money card. So it could be, again, going, well, like I said, with the top line, the Kipper line, this could be about questioning the value, right? What would be the value of having a relationship with his father at this point in time? And, you know, also, too, is there an underlying agenda, and it may be having to do with money, that's also involved here, right? But now Fish, in and of itself, in terms of a relationship, and we do have the inset of the King of Diamonds, so that could be a reference to Brian's father, right? Because for me, kings in cartomancy can represent men. So here we have that. But the Fish card can be about like how deep does Brian want to go with this relationship, because this card can be about depth. It can also be about circulation, flow. So there may be issues about, you know, how is the relationship going to flow? Is there going to be the ability for them to circulate, right, with one another, especially with Brian going off to school? Right, but I would also say too, like, this card for me is making me feel it can also be about depth in terms of like how deep are they going to go here? Is it going to be superficial, or are they going to really go deep in this, especially with conversation that has depth? If I mirror the cards here, this would be deep conversation, but it could also be, again, conversation, communication regarding money. Okay, next card. Here we have the heart card. Okay, so now the heart card is the card that talks about emotions and feelings. It's also about love. So here we go. There's, you know, a depth of emotion here in this line with this card showing up. And then we have a dynamic here in the playing card inserts. We have the King of Diamonds here, and then we have the Jack of Hearts here. Jack of Hearts, Jacks in playing card cartomancy for me can represent younger people of either gender. So this could be Brian's dad, and this could be a stand-in for Brian. But these two cards could suggest, like, maybe the longer that his father's in the picture and they start communicating, maybe a lot of emotions are going to come up for Brian. Okay, and then the last card. And here we have Rider. Okay, so now Rider is a card that can represent the arrival of something or someone. It could represent a visit, news or messages. And so now here again, we have this idea here, the possibility of the duration of Brian's father in the picture, right? Because I'm looking at this and thinking of the idea of like somebody riding off into the sunset, yeah? So we here on this opening part, we have birds and right, the idea of maybe somebody being flighty, and then here we have somebody who might be riding off into the sunset, right? With this idea about an arrival or a visit. You know, visit is something that's short term, right? The word visit implies a short duration of time. And now this could also be Brian heading out to college himself, right? You know, so that could also be a reason why this situation might not have a whole lot of duration. Right? It could also be because of the emotions that come up. Because that order of the cards, this happens and then this happens, right? Narration. But now a lot of the cards here, 3 cards at least, talk about communication. So the Rider is actually a communication card because it is a person who delivers news or messages. So this is a communication card. We have letter and we have birds. So I'm looking at the 2 as a combination, suggesting that Brian may have communication issues to kind of overcome. The idea of whether or not he actually wants to open the door to communicate to or with his father. And then the idea here about, you know, how long is the father going to be in the picture. So that is how I'm going to leave the Kipper and Lenormand combo reading. I hope for the viewer who asked for this, I hope this was helpful for you in your own personal study and practice of the cards. I'm guessing because of the request that you read both Kipper and Lenormand. So again, I hope this was helpful. And if you are not the viewer who made the request and you made it to this point of the video, I thank you so much for giving me the gift of your time. I never take that lightly. And so this is James and Mitchell signing off, and I look forward to seeing you in the next installment of the Kipper Cards by Category video series. So until then, take care.